Hey everybody, this is Bo Sanders and I am back doing theology in public. It's kind of a fun theme. Listen, there's been this meme going around Facebook and social media, and when I first saw it I was like, oh no. And I wasn't going to say anything at first, but the more I see it shared, the more I feel compelled to address something because I think it's problematic. Now this is NT Wright. He's a fantastic biblical scholar. I adore this man. He has done such a great job at popularizing biblical scholarship and bringing it to a general audience. I've met him, I've interviewed him, I'm a huge fan. I give his materials away, I utilize his commentaries, but here's the thing. This meme is only 75% right, and the other part of it, that 25%, is problematic. So here's the quote. For too long, we've read scripture with 19th century eyes and 16th century questions, which is true. It's time we get back to reading it with 1st century eyes and 21st century questions. And I agree with the 21st century questions. Since that's the century that we live in, we have some questions. Here's the problem. We don't have 1st century eyes. We can't. It is literally impossible that we would have 1st century eyes. We have 21st century eyes. And so as romantic as this notion is, it is problematic because if you are going to have a Christian religion, a Christian spirituality, and it's going to be legitimated in its day and in its time, we can't afford to romanticize some remembered notion of the past, some era, and try to import it, which is impossible. We cannot go back. And so this idea of having 1st century eyes, look, we've looked through telescopes, we've looked through microscopes, we look at screens, we're reading NT Wright books, we're post-Gutenberg press. We don't have 1st century eyes. We have 21st century eyes. And so this becomes, for me, very problematic when we romanticize notions of the past. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. But I want to say that it's not just NT Wright. For instance, I've been keeping track of different spiritual or church-related or religious Christian projects, and I have been shocked at how many of them start with the letters R-E. It's like an industry. It's amazing. We have renovate, reframe, remember, recall, revive, redeem, represent or represent, restore, return, renew, reform, reimagine, re-examine, reinforce, revisit, reclaim, reframe, react, respond, and we love retreats. And this is just a little list that I came up with. Other people have been contributing. It's like a growing list. We love words that start with R-E. And part of that is because of this impulse to go back and reclaim or repurpose or recycle notions of the past, because we are under the impression that Christianity is oriented towards the past. You know, the incarnation is in the past. But here's the thing. Christianity is not just incarnational, meaning it is an embodied practice, community, belief in our day and time. It is also inherently Pentecostal. That the church communicates in its language, in its day, in its time, to its culture, the good news of Jesus Christ. So we're not always reaching into the past and trying to redo something. In fact, here's why I think that's so dangerous. You have other groups, it's not just NT Wright, you have other groups like the Radical Orthodox or the Post-Liberals. James K. Smith would be in this camp, Milbank, McIntyre, and I would even put Hauerwas here. These are people who are trying to reclaim notions from Aristotle. So in trying to grab these Greek concepts, these antiquated or ancient concepts, and bring them into our day as a solution to what they see as a problem, I actually agree with much of their project. Their critique of capitalism and global consumerism is legit, and I totally resonate with it. In fact, about 90% of what they do, I think, is right on. But when it comes time for a solution, they fall into error. Because what they try and do by going back and grabbing these Aristotelian notions is they try and pluck something like praxis is a big one. Polis is an organizing, like a community organized in these centers, polis centers. Habitus, which is character formation through habit. And in my field of practical theology, phronesis is the big one. And that's enacted wisdom. All concepts that are great. Here's the thing. You can't just reach into the past, the first century in this case, pluck out a notion or a concept, import it as if in a vacuum, and drop it into the 21st century without importing what is inherited in those notions and in those traditions, that there is a cultural element. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. They're not neutral concepts. They come embedded with levels of racism, sexism, hierarchy, and disparity. And I get this from Susan Heckman. She has a feminist critique of communitarianism, a political theory or political theology. And she has a really strong critique. And she says that when we deal with these romanticized notions and try to remember them now, we break them up, we try and remember them, something like polis or praxis or phronesis or habitus. We try and reclaim, recycle, repurpose, whatever it is, whatever our project is, that we bring with that concept and then end up reinforcing the very structure that it was not only embedded in, but was birthed out of, that it's in the DNA of these concepts. You can't just grab polis as an organizing principle and import it into our 21st century without also bringing with it the inherited hierarchy, male domination, land ownership issues, not to mention issues of nationality, xenophobia, racism, whatever. You can't just import that stuff because it was embedded and is intrinsically laden within its DNA without reinforcing the very things we're trying to counter. And so while it seems like a great notion or impulse that we have this problem with consumerism and global capitalism that we're trying to say this is not good for the soul, the answer is not to go back to the first century or ancient Greece and try and reclaim these Greek or Aristotelian notions and drag and drop them into the 21st century, because by doing that we're going to reinforce the very structures that we're trying to combat. So here's the thing. Instead of trying to have first century eyes, which is impossible anyway, literally impossible, we need to embrace that the Christian religion is fine. In fact, it is equipped well to be in our day, in our time, to speak our language, that Scripture is infinitely translatable. Lamansana talks about this. And so we don't have to, especially as white men, we need to be careful about romanticizing eras or notions from the past and trying to reclaim them and drag them kicking and screaming because we're going to import other junk that was connected to them and out of which they were birthed, and reinforce the very structures that the gospel is trying to combat. So we can proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ, that God is at work in our day, in our time, that God is speaking the good news of liberation, of freedom, of community, of love and grace in our day, in our time, in our language. And so it's time to get rid of this romantic notion of first century eyes and really warm up to the fact that we don't live in the first century. Thank God. Okay, so if you want to give me some feedback, I'd love your comments, your questions, your critique, your feedback. I love expanding this conversation, and I look forward to hearing from you. God bless.